Welcome to the How-To-Overthink Podcast with Jahan Thacker. Jahan, do you want to give a quick intro to yourself, very simply in terms of like what you're currently doing, maybe in terms of work, but also just how you're spending your time, and what are some of the key things that you value or are working on right now?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So my name is Jahan and I work in digital marketing. Currently working with a friend to co-found an agency that specializes in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean companies advertising in the West. So we're just working on that now and have some potential clients lined up. In my spare time, really into yoga or anything to do with self-development and self-transformation. Salsa and Bachata, so partner dancing. So for those that don't know, it's dancing where it's all improvised. There's certain rules to the dance, but generally it's an improvised dance. And I really find that exciting and fun. Really like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or combat sports in general, but only martial arts where there's a competitive sporting element to it. I don't like martial arts that have just strict self-defense or traditional, only those that have a sporting sparring element to it. I really like gymnastics. Basically, all this comes down to is when I was young, I wanted to be a superhero. So anything that brings me as close to this as possible. So gymnastics, obsessed with board games because I think when I was younger, I always assumed I was introverted. But it turned out I just had a broken nose, and that meant I was always tired. But because of that, I found ways to socialize where I could distract myself while socializing. But that fell into a whole love for board games and problem solving and hanging out in that way. And then, yeah, I love reading books. And I think that's probably the main summary.
Cool,
Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah, I think it's like fair to say you're one of the most like multifaceted people in terms of like there are so many things not only you do but you're also like very good at. When I first met you at Brain Labs, that actually became like quite obvious quite quickly. And I think the first thing was when you just like quite quickly started breaking out breakdancing at the like after work dance
yeah,
social,
yeah,
which like definitely didn't require
yeah,
breakdancing, but it was like it was insane. And then also, BJJ, obviously your career, and then the wider personal development piece as well. But yeah, there are just so many like different skills or activities where we'll like sometimes talk about them and you're like, oh yeah, I've done it for like 10, 15 years, etc. So that's just like a really cool thing. Um, on the personal development side, one of the things that we spoke a lot about recently, just over WhatsApp, is you were saying about like the spoken word and speaking, and about how maybe you had a big change from when you were younger to the groups you're around, the people you're around, the way that you speak. And my understanding is not that you've like left those behind in any ways, but you've kind of like expanded your personality, the way that you speak, and all these different
yeah.
aspects.
Yes, I could from my perspective. So one thing is that when I was younger, I was raised in Hounslow. I don't know if you know this part of London. It's voted one of the saddest places in London to live. But the main issue relevant to your question is that everyone there speaks exclusively slang in school. So no one is speaking formal English. And this just led to a deterioration of my ability to express myself. And I think I told you the story on WhatsApp is one day there was some fight around the corner, and then one of the older kids said, "Yo, Jay, Wagwan, what happened? What happened there?" I said, "What happened in that fight?" And I wasn't able to express myself. I kept saying like every 2 seconds. I realized that this is such a hindrance. This is going to be a hindrance if I don't work on this. And I can't remember who said it. It may have been Jordan Peterson. I can't remember who, but someone said like command over English is a weapon, or command over English is
Yeah.
in a day and age where you don't need to be physically strong. Command over English. Okay, maybe it wasn't him, so I will have to find out later on who said it. But either way, that really resonated with me. And then when I joined rather, Brain Labs, the company that we met at, one of the greatest privileges was that majority of the company went to private school or went to Oxbridge. And I thought by osmosis, this is finally the time where I can work on my English. And I saw how people who were maybe 5 years younger than me had so much more authority just because of their ability to use rhetoric and speak. And I thought I have to work on this now. I have to just listen, just constantly pay attention and just try and pick up what everyone's saying. Prior to Brain Labs, I spent 1 year in India and training to this classical yoga teacher training. And within that it was every day from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. And a big part of that was that you had to, I don't know what the word to use, but you had to transmit, for want of a better term, this practice exactly verbatim as it was taught to me. So there was hours of content I had to memorize by heart. And I think that had an effect on my speech, first of all. And then going to Brain Labs afterwards and hanging out with so many intelligent people added on to that. And I think because you're unlike the rest of the people there, I felt you didn't have this pretentious vibe. You're very relaxed. So it was very easy to speak to you. But I think with some others, and then it's nothing against them. It's more my insecurity than them, just to be clear. I felt very hesitant to speak. For the first year, I hardly spoke in socials because I just felt the way I'm presenting myself is not what they're used to. It's a much lower caliber of, not a different caliber, a different way of expressing. I wouldn't say lower. So I actually think there's a lot of beauty in London slang. I think it's very fun when I do express it. But for a global world, when you're wanting to make money, when you want to have an impact, in this context, I think command over clear English is so powerful.
Interesting. How did you find going back to maybe some of those social circles or in Hounslow? Do you find yourself like very binary, switching in and out of it, or is it more that there's is there a spectrum? Like how do you find it?
Did you speak any other language?
No other
okay.
languages.
Do you know a friend who speaks multiple languages and they meet someone who speaks another language that they speak and they just naturally switch and there's a rapport builds instantly?
Yeah.
So I find it great in terms of rapport building, just as much if I met someone who speaks Polish, I might say a few words in Polish, but knowing that you don't speak Polish, I'll switch back to English. So depending on the environment, if everyone understands these expressions and mannerisms, I'll probably speak mostly slang for that interaction, because it's a quick way of expressing myself. There's a reason it's developed, right? Because you can express so much in a familiar way. But if there's some people that do speak like that, some that don't, then it might, you go in and out just to build some familiarity.
A question on that in terms of the Polish language as well. How would you describe your Polish accent when you speak Polish? Is it from a specific region, from a specific kind of community? Is it from does it have like an international twang to it?
One thing I think that's quite unique to Britain is how much variability there is in one language. Liverpool, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. I think other languages will have dialects, but you won't hear as much with accents. So that's not as common, I think, in other languages, and maybe people can correct me on this. But in Poland, there's maybe 3 distinct variants, and the one that I would speak, or the one I've learned from, I wouldn't say I sound like this. I probably sound like an English person speaking Polish, but the Polish I've learned is the capital city, Warsaw, Polish, but a bit more formal. I think my family are a bit more on the sort of formal side, maybe similar to the Brain Labs vibe, but the Poland equivalent.
Interesting.
So they wouldn't be swearing, no curse words, very eloquently expressing themselves. So I guess there's a mixture of English language, slightly grammatical errors, and then a nice use of vocabulary that wouldn't be as common. If that makes sense.
And on the some of the words used, you once said to me, pretty sure you're talking about Polish.
Yeah.
That the way in the Polish language you address someone who's older than you,
yes,
is like a very set way of doing that. And your like hypothesis or theory was that this also impacts the way that you kind of generally see them or respect them, or
I mean, there are studies on this.
Oh, okay.
Especially with women who speak Japanese and women who speak English, and they're much more dominant when they speak English language compared to Japanese, because it's a hierarchical language.
Interesting.
So in Polish, the same. So let's say you were 10 years older than me and we're meeting in Poland. I wouldn't say, would you like a drink? I would say, would sir like a drink? Now imagine how that transfers into a debate. We're having a debate. I'm like, and you're saying, are you telling me this? I'm returning with, is sir telling me this? How can that not subconsciously impact the mood? So there is that, I think, but I actually quite enjoy it in Poland. I like the respect, but I've never been in a position where it's infringed upon my freedom. So maybe if I was living there, maybe if I was a young woman and I had to call everyone sir, maybe there would be a negative. Or if I was in the office as a young intern. But in day-to-day life, I find it quite pleasant. Even English, there was a you and a thou.
Yeah,
and
interesting.
Thou was to friends and you was to superiors. And then everyone became you.
Interesting.
So even in English, they used to be there.
Nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But I still think if you go to certain societies in England, you would still say sir or madam. It's small pockets.
In small pockets, and particularly around like the royal family and things like that. There's all a royal protocol and that sort of thing. But in general, it's just something we wouldn't even think about.
Yeah. But I do think, to answer your question, it does add a layer of submissiveness when someone may have not earned it. They're not necessarily smarter than you. They're just older than you. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice.
Or respect, depends what word you want to use. Is it respect or something? I don't know. Yeah.
So a question back on the language, is that something you're still working on, or is it something that you still kind of focus on or think about?
Yeah, even now, so if I send a WhatsApp clip and I say once, I'll restart the whole WhatsApp clip.
Oh, interesting.
Even if it's a 5-minute clip, I'll have to, that's a self rule. If I say like, if I say if I say so, maybe so, I'll have some leeway there. But any filler words that don't have a purpose to it, just once, I'll make the whole clip.
Nice. That's quite a good way
scratch.
to train yourself in those scenarios, because like in most social interactions, you couldn't just start from the beginning, so you just have to like keep going.
Exactly.
Whereas with voice notes, you know, do have that ability to course correct. You also have a thing around sending voice notes where you tend not to send super long ones.
Yeah. So that's because if someone sends me a super long voice note, I find it very tricky to respond to. So if you send me every 2 minutes, I can respond to each of those key points. When there's an 8-minute audio clip, I need to pause it, respond. So just to make it easier for the other person to reply, I do it in small snippets. But it also helps with this technique of self-correcting every clip, because to do an 8-minute clip back from scratch would be very annoying, and just it'll be diminishing returns will kick in at that point. So for two reasons: one, it makes it easier for the recipient to reply, and it means that if I do restart, I don't have to go back too much. Another thing, just to answer your previous question, working on it is trying to make sure that reading is always an aspect of my life. I think reading, especially classical fantasy or classic literature, I think through osmosis, that adds to your vocabulary. Rather than directly, I'm going to study, I'm doing things I enjoy, which is talking to friends and reading. And I think both of those just become a means of education. Rather than, for example, I'm actively studying Korean now. That's an active pursuit. But this is just happening as a byproduct of whatever I do.
Nice. Makes sense. And in terms of career, what's prompted the most recent interest?
So I've always been interested in Japan and China since I was young. And Korea sort of adjacent culturally to these places. But what makes Korean language unique is that Korean, you can learn to read in about half an hour.
You can learn to read.
You can literally, if I sent you a YouTube video right now and I spoke to you again in half an hour's time, you could read probably 80% of the Korean language. Because a king 700 years ago rewrote the Korean alphabet and broke away from Chinese, which is character based, whereas Korean is based on letters, A, B, C. It's based on sounds. I don't know what the technical term is. And they had a 99% literacy rate back ages ago. Farmers could write to local politicians or local lords, rather.
What? How many years ago was this?
I think it was 700 or 500.
Okay, 700
I'm not a Korean history expert.
What I was thinking is so these letters, they're not, they're not like from the Latin alphabet.
No, unrelated. So no one knows the Korean etymology. No one knows where Korean came from in terms of the oral speech. There are theories of where it comes from, a few Chinese words, but the written alphabet, I think it's one of the early alphabets where we have the clear history of how it was made. That's another interesting fact. But it was made by this king.
Gotcha.
Whatever, 100 years ago, just from scratch, he made it. And the letters sort of represent the mouth shape when you do some logic to it.
Oh, interesting. Quite like that.
I don't really see it. I don't really apparently it does.
Yeah.
I can't see it. Maybe someone more educated would know. But to answer your question, so Korean, because I'm interested in that part of the world. I mentioned earlier we have a business idea with a friend, which we're getting on now.
Do you want to talk about that now?
Yeah, sure. So the business idea is that the Japanese yen is at its lowest it's ever been. And generally Asian currencies are weaker compared to European currencies. I have an interest in Asia. I have a friend who we both know, Lin, who speaks Japanese, and I have contacts in Korea, contacts in Japan. And I've now met a lady who's Chinese who has many contacts in China and Chinese businesses in the UK. And I believe that digital marketing is getting easier and easier, where a smaller quantity of team can still bring a high quality of work. So let's say we have a large agency that gives 10 people per client. I think that's completely diminishing returns when machine learning and smart bidding does so much. And according to all the reps of every platform, so representatives of every platform, the latest best practices are consolidated structures which make it conducive for machine learning to do the job for you. Your job is to provide context, so make it simplified. Your job isn't to do these complex campaigns. It still takes years of knowledge. Takes me 10 minutes, would take someone 10 years to learn if they haven't done it in 10 years, like 2 years, 3 years to learn. So I still think it's a skill you should pay for. But my point is I can provide, or anyone, you can provide with we've had the same training. You can provide high quality service with a much smaller team that was needed just 3-4 years ago. So my business model was, first of all, bring Asian businesses to the West where there's a higher currency, higher power, so they can gain profit. And secondly, I think we can provide a high quality of service for a lower fee, because I think most agencies are just lying to their clients how much they need. So this is my idea. Maybe we'll see what happens.
How do you think the agency landscape might change, given that fact?
Well, I think agencies can outcompete smaller, say, freelancer in their mom's garage who just makes, because what they can do is they can do unique ad tech. They can make ad scripts. They can what they can provide is, let's say I make a campaign, Performance Max. So for those that don't know, it's just a one-click button, all of Google services in one campaign: YouTube, Gmail, Google Ads, search ads, etc. I can make that just as well as a team of 10 can make that. But what a team of ad tech can do is they can break down this black box of how is it working, and they can maybe use some ad script to report on it, or they can make a tech tool that says, you know what, actually Google's wasting money in this region, even though it's not providing conversions. You've let the smart bidding run wild. We can bring this back. So I think they can bring small efficiencies and more. We can break a campaign into more granular campaigns so that we can report on it. Not necessarily better performance, but they can tell you why. Then the client can use that why in other parts of the business. So I still think there are many advantages that an agency has.
For sure.
But I
think often one is simply just the number of like case studies, like one each individual has, but also as a collective they've all got.
The hive mind.
Yeah, the hive mind, and one just not making, stupid mistakes, which is often the most costly thing.
Yeah.
But second, also knowing what kind of tests, what initiatives to prioritize, and in what order can just massively speed up how a business makes its marketing decisions.
And more capacity, right? Just to run these tests take time. To run these optimizations takes time. And like you said, if you have a team of 10 as opposed to a team of 1, each of those teams on a unique test, they share those tests. Everyone benefits in that client, the client list. So I think there are definitely pros and cons, but I think for those that have a smaller budget, I think they can be provided with a better service. For those with bigger budgets, why would you not go to a big successful agency? They can provide you so much. But I think for the medium size, the SMBs, I think there's a unique selling point where you can charge a bit less and still give them high quality work. If they want that
when you say SMBs, what sort of size are you defining? Are you defining that in terms of headcount or revenue?
I think revenue. Yeah. But we have to see how it goes. Right now, everything's, you get the synchronicity, everything's falling into place. So I just had this idea after watching La La Land, which you told me to watch. A fantastic film. And I just broke down in tears thinking I'm not living my potential. And I just called, I messaged Lynn, our friend. I said, dude, I want to do this agency. What do you think? And he said, I'm just having a break from work. Perfect timing. And I told another girl about it. She said, I've got a friend who wants to invest in this business. She has many Chinese clients and she's looking for people that are competent in this. Let's all arrange a meeting. And then I got a new job where I've been exposed to a more senior strategy role. So for the first time in my marketing career, I'm 100% delegating, because before I was always in platform, and I get access to a lot of that sort of level quality of work. I'm seeing how we're negotiating fee structures, so I can apply that to my business. So everything just fell into place, and I thought we have to do this. But I mean, I've not even told you about it, I don't think, until this.
You told me bits and pieces, but now you're putting the whole kind of journey together.
So I wanted to wait until it was a bit more finalized, but I think because of this, we're having this chat, I'll bring it up now. And yes, that's it really. Cool. On that topic.
Nice. Makes sense. And then another big topic to touch on is your approach to fitness, working out, both from a kind of like general enjoyment of life and like what are your goals, but also like very specifically how often you're training now.
So it started with the very traditional, I don't know if you're aware of the 5x5 model. That's really popular for most beginning gym goers. For those that aren't aware, so it's just focusing only on compound lifts, bench, deadlift, squat, deadlift, row, overhead press, and maybe clean and press or clean and jerk in some variants. And you pick 5 reps. So on the 5th rep, it should be a struggle, and you do either 3 or 5 sets of that. And it's broken down. It's a very common program you can find online. And I always felt that my arms were always being neglected with this program. In theory, there are studies to show that doing pure compounds should give you the arm growth you need, but I just felt it wasn't enough. So I started to switch, started reading a bit more about bodybuilding, but by that time, lockdown hit. We had no access to gym. I wasn't smart enough to invest in dumbbells.
Overpriced dumbbells.
Yeah, like you have. And then I thought, what's next? What do I do now? And then I discovered, calisthenics. But the issue of calisthenics is, I don't know if you've had a phase with calisthenics, is that most people just go more reps. But no one trains like that in the gym, in the weights room. I don't see anyone doing 1,000 reps of bench press as if that's normal. They'll go up in weight, and the reps stay between 5 to 12 reps, maybe 3 to 12 reps. When they hit that 12th rep, they probably go up in weight, and then they go maybe back down to 8 reps, and they go back up to 12 reps, up in weight. No one just continuously going up endlessly in reps. So that's when I thought, there's something with calisthenics here, but your body doesn't know the difference between weights, body weight, and machines. There's just resistance. There's no one in my mind saying, this is no longer an external weight, so now you need to all of a sudden use different protocols apply. That doesn't make sense. So I was researching more about calisthenics. I discovered something called progressions. So just like you go up in a bench press, in a push up, if you start here, the closer your hands get to your waist, it's the equivalent of adding weight to a bench press. So I start the push up here. And if I was to do push up when my hands are close to my waist, it's called a pseudo planche push up. It's all of a sudden the leverage is worse. And due to leverage being worse, it feels like there's more load on the targeted muscles. So that's when I was like, wow, you can
And
treat.
worse in terms of a greater strain.
Yeah, exactly. And then the progressions from pseudo planche push up will be getting your feet off the ground, eventually doing your feet in the air, doing push ups, called a planche push up. So that was one big discovery of a lockdown, was that you can treat calisthenics the way you could treat a weights program, in that you go up in intensity rather than just up in pure volume. And then from that came discovery of something called high intensity training, which is often confused with high intensity interval training, but they're separate. It's HIT rather than HIIT. And I'm not saying I'm a complete believer in this, but I've been experimenting this for the last few years, which is that if you give anyone a training program which is fairly intense, and assuming they don't get injured, and assuming they're not on steroids, within a certain length of time, they'll probably reach the genetic potential regardless of training style, assuming it's hard enough and there's no injury. Just like how index fund over time is going to grow. Similar theory to index funds versus stocks. Over time, index funds probably outcompetes stock picking. Same with this. Over time, your body will just reach its genetic potential, assuming those two factors. So I thought, okay, in that case, which program has the lowest chance of injury and the least time cost? Because as you mentioned earlier, I like to have many interests and hobbies.
Yep.
So that's when I got into HIT, which is a few protocols where you train once or twice a week. You train to absolute failure, and all the reps are done slowly with zero momentum, and you never do full range of motion. So you're always keeping the muscles under tension. And I felt I got some big benefits. My pull-ups went up, my physique improved. There were many benefits, and I felt I was much fitter than average. I could do muscle-ups, could do 15 plus pull-ups, could do handstand push-ups.
And for context, what other sporting activities were you doing alongside this? Just from a
during this time. So during this time, I was fixed my broken nose, because I broke my nose 4 times, and I don't know if I told you, but I had sleep apnea due to that. Because I realized if you don't nasal breathe at night, or just generally if you don't nasal breathe, which is why strips are so popular, it doesn't rejuvenate the brain properly, or I don't know the correct scientific terms. So I fixed my broken nose because I just thought I don't want to live in this constant lazy state, or this lethargic state. So that time I wasn't doing many sports. I was just doing once a week training and salsa dancing, which doesn't really count as much. And then slowly getting back into gymnastics and jiu-jitsu, but this is just very recently. So I was doing this once a week training. I noticed all these improvements, and I thought, wow, this is a huge discovery, that a dad who says, I can't go to the gym 3 times a week, so therefore I'm going to go 0 times a week. Yeah. I thought, if these people just knew that if you could train 40 minutes a week, you can gain week on week. The caveat is, when I compared myself to others who were training way more intensely, I thought I wasn't on their level. I'm not doing one-arm pull-ups. I'm not doing full planche push-ups. So I still feel that I don't fully buy the argument that this does reach your genetic potential, at least not in the time frame I'm happy with. But I do believe that 40 minutes a week is enough to make you look better and get stronger week on week.
Gotcha.
The question is, how much stronger do you want to get? So
if you could put a percentage on that, what would you put on it?
Oh, I don't know. But I think it also depends on your baseline, because the closer you are to genetic potential, the harder it is to. Do you play Pokemon as a kid?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
I did Yu-Gi-Oh, but not Pokemon.
Okay, so in these role-playing video games, are very popular. When you get a starter Pokemon, you beat another Pokemon, you get XP, and your Pokemon levels up. In the beginning, that happens very rapidly, and as your Pokemon gets stronger and stronger and stronger, the amount of grinding, the amount of training you have to do to reach the next level is exponentially longer, using this video game analogy. So I think as you get closer to your genetic potential, for example, when you start a bench press, you might go from the bar to 25 to 30 to 35 to 40 to 50 to 60, 70, maybe to 80 kg within a few months. But then 82, and that time it went from 20 to 80, let's say it was 4 months, just made up. It might be just as long to get to 80 to 100, also 4 months. But the gap was actually that was a 40 kg gap, that was a 20 kg gap. Because as you get closer to your genetic potential, it's harder and harder to make incremental gains. So to answer your question, it would depend on if they're newbie gains. You might have heard that.
Yeah, sure.
Are they newbie gains? Also, there's also neurological pathways. You just get used to a pattern. So for example, many people claim free weights are better than machines. And I'm not going to I don't know what the answer to that question is. But my issue with many of the studies is that maybe the test of what's better is the bench press itself. So let's say you're doing chest press, I'm doing bench press. And then we're testing on bench press. Am I stronger than you because my bench is higher? Or is it because I'm used to that movement pattern So therefore my bench is higher, not that my chest is stronger. Does that make
100% makes
so?
sense.
So that's why I feel it's very hard to gauge, because are they newbie gains? Are they just getting used to? Are they getting used to
And these
pull-ups?
studies were more based on strength rather than like looking at overall muscle growth.
They'll be strength based, yeah. Because there's a
Strength-based.
clear, and then I think there are some muscle growth ones. I've not taken a deep dive into these, but I know that a lot of the free weights versus machines debates are often they're tested in a way that tend to favor the free weights when you get into it. But so, and I think that's why a lot of people say, "I'll never do machines, never do machines." But the thing is, if you're not training to be an Olympic weightlifting athlete, if you're not training to be a CrossFitter, if you're not training to be a strongman, if you're not training to be a powerlifter, what is your reason for not using a safer variant of an exercise? You know, if I can chest press to absolute failure and nothing's going to happen to me, whereas a bench press, I need a spotter, a very high chance of rotator cuff injury. And if I'm not going to look any better than the guy using the chest press, I'm not competing in a sport that requires a barbell technique. I don't really know why I would train in a bar. These are just questions. I don't know the answer. I'm not a sports scientist, but
Makes sense.
this is making me think. I'm using calisthenics, so
Yeah.
I'm not using
Makes sense.
either free weights or machines. But I think these discussions are too often people just say machines are stupid, let's do free weights. I think no one takes into, like I said, because training, what is training? Is training to make you stronger, or is training to make you stronger but also less likely to be injured? If we assume both those prerequisites, machines all of a sudden look much more appealing to me than they did when I was, say, 19 and just wanting to get the best bench possible.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about these topics.
No, I think I definitely agree. And I think something I'm thinking a lot more about now is injury prevention as well. I had like a very small injury snowboarding earlier this year, and it was the lower back, so it just affected so much of what I was doing. And then I spoke to a friend who's a personal trainer, and he gave me some exercises which really, helped strengthen the imbalance, which made it more likely for me to be injured, but then also the things around how to give instant relief to the affected area. But the fact that or his diagnosis was that I already had an imbalance in part of my body, which made it more likely for me to be injured. And then when I am injured, harder for that area to recover because the muscles were spasming in a specific way. Has made me think a lot more about just adding in extra pieces, not necessarily on the training day, but in and around that, because they're normally not particularly high intensity.
Work.
Exactly, accessory work, most of which I can do from home, and most of which revolving around my hip flexors, in order to prevent injury. But also, as you said, when I'm in the gym, what are the exercises that I can do that, at least from where I am at now in the journey, what is it? What is the payoff? And one that at the moment I'm focusing more on alternative exercises is like barbell squat. And I'm focusing on other exercises rather than that core exercise, which is a little bit more prone to injury, particularly if you want to really push it as well.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing is, why are you training? Are we training for a particular sport? Are we training for health? Are we training to look good? Maybe for all of us there's a mixture of those. And I think people just really look down on particular ways of training just because, and I think this leads to another point, is should you mimic professional athletes who have the best nutrition, the best coaching? They are willing to damage their body in the future for high reward now, right? Their body is their income.
It's also with high performance athletes, it's often very difficult to know what their training frequency actually is. My understanding is with like powerlifters that they actually do, regular lifting multiple times a week, 5 days, maybe more. Whereas there are some sports, and this is going off a little bit in a tangent, like very high diving into water, where once you're doing above like 10 meters and they're going up to 20 meters plus, the number of dives that they do per week is normally like 1 or 2, because the impact on the body is so intense from hitting water from that height at that speed. And I think there are so many sports where it's just not clear what the frequency is, and that makes it harder to mimic it. You also
don't know who's on performance enhancement drugs. You don't know who's not. So there's just so many questions. And I think just this whole nature of mimicking professional athletes for a recreational guy who just wants to look better, I think that disconnect needs to be more popular. Just thinking, what do you need to train safely and healthily and look good and be healthy?
Gotcha.
I'm not saying it has to be machines. Like I said, I'm not using machines. I'm doing calisthenics. Contrary to what I said before, I think this is the best bang for your buck. If you can do a handstand push-up, I think your overhead press will probably go up. Because if I brought someone who just has overhead press, they probably would struggle to learn a handstand push-up off the go. Because there's just so many factors into calisthenics. So I do think there's the most bang for your buck are the calisthenics variants, in my personal experience. Another example is if I can do a full planche push-up, or if you get an Olympic gymnast to do some weights, they can probably lift, say, 200% or a certain percentage of their body weight. But you get an elite power lifter to make him do a planche push-up, it would be impossible. Just wouldn't be able to do it. Anyway, that all being said, I think if someone is just training for their own personal reasons, I think there needs to be a big change in this worldview of disconnecting between a professional athlete that's willing to damage his knees, willing to damage his back, willing to have a shoulder pain for the rest of his or her life because he wants to get a gold medal, to you want to look good and be healthy to your 60 and walk up the stairs with ease. So that's my main thing.
100. I reckon you're much better than most people about talking and going on further tangents. You know what I mean? In a sec, I was just keen to ask you about the MMA side. But you can naturally finish the point you were about to
say. Yeah. Come on, say no. Shit.
Okay. So on this tangent around, bang for your buck, both from a productivity perspective, but also from like a general kind of life enjoyment. In terms of combat sports, where would you say is the biggest bang for your buck?
Yeah.
And there's probably two ways to answer that. One in terms of general fitness, possibly injury prevention, but also the one that everyone has an opinion about is what is the best in terms of actually defending yourself in real life.
Yeah. And to clarify, I'm not military personnel. I'm not working in security. I'm not a professional fighter, but I'm a big hobbyist in the scene and trained in many styles and read about it a lot, hear other opinions and sparring in many styles. This is from this perspective, just to give the context.
And you've done it for quite a while.
Yeah, exactly. But I've never been, say, in a knife confrontation or a gun to my head. So there's just casual level university street fights and lots of sport fights. So first of all, you need to break down martial arts into 3 tiers. There's traditional martial arts, which are martial arts that are doing their best to honor a previous tradition. And whoever founded that, or if they know whether they know the founder or not, depending on how many hundreds of years, they want to keep that particular structure going. That's one style. An example would be traditional Kung Fu. Then another style is self-defense martial arts. The very common, most popular one would be Krav Maga.
Krav Maga, yeah.
Which is designed...
I did Krav Maga for 2 years as well.
Okay, nice. Yeah. It'd be good to hear your opinion. So Krav Maga, which is it's specifically designed for street or whatever, any self-defense situation, assuming no rules, assuming the worst case scenario. And then you have, which is my favorite, which is combat sport, which is a martial art that has a rule set to it. And due to this rule set, it means that you are allowed to go fairly hard on a partner without there being any serious injury. That's a prerequisite for combat sport. There has to be enough rules that we can go hard and resist each other, but then also, depending on the combat sport, few enough, not too many rules that it becomes ridiculous and you can still have a good fight. So these are the 3 tiers, and within them, they're whole topics on themselves.
For sure.
Now, let's say, I don't know how you know if the story of jiu-jitsu versus judo in old Japan.
Very curious.
So jiu-jitsu is the Japanese samurai hand-to-hand combat sport. When they lost their weapons, they would use jiu-jitsu. And when the sword was banned, all the traditional Japanese martial sports, which were jitsu, which means techniques, became do, which means the way. So kenjutsu, which is the swordsmanship, became kendo, which is the bamboo, the fencing. So it was a way to preserve the samurai culture and make it into a Zen sort of Buddhist practice.
Gotcha.
And of these, there's the archery, there's the swordsmanship, and then there's the hand-to-hand. When there's a guy called Jigoro Kano, and he devised a style called Kano Jiu-Jitsu, which later on became Judo. It's important, that name difference later on in the story.
Kano Jiu-Jitsu?
Kano Jiu-Jitsu. Because when it went to Brazil, the name Kano Jiu-Jitsu went to Brazil. But actually, it was Judo that went to Brazil, and that became Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but that's a separate story.
That's super interesting.
So it should be called Brazilian Judo, but it's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because the name change wasn't done in time by the time his students went to Brazil. But I'll get to that later. So he was a very small man relative to the other Japanese combatants, and he analyzed which techniques do not require superior force to be used. That's fair enough. But what interested me is he also only kept techniques that you could do full force without injuring your training partner. So a common example might be a choke, an arm lock, maybe a wrist lock, an ankle lock. I don't know what techniques they had back then because the sports evolved a lot. But with these joint locks and chokes and throws, there's enough time for you to tap out and say, I concede, and when you start again. Whereas if you poked my eye out during the sparring training, you've lost a training partner for the rest of your life. So he filtered
I
down.
love the framing of the loss in that scenario is not the loss of the
Oh,
eye,
yeah,
it's the
he
loss
lost
of
the
the training partner.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Yeah, someone's lost irrecoverable a piece of their body, and you lost a training partner.
Exactly.
But from an efficiency perspective, it wasn't wise. So anyway, because of this, it allowed something in Japanese called randori, which means, I think it means sparring. I don't know the exact translation, but basically it means sparring. So he devised this new form of Kano Jiu-Jitsu or Judo, and then the police of Japan said, we need to pick a martial art for our police force. Let's have a competition. 10 Jiu-Jitsu black belts versus 10 Judo black belts. The Jiu-Jitsu black belts knew all the lethal techniques, techniques that would instantly maim you, would kill you. And the Judo guys just knew basic submissions and basic throws and chokes that were fairly safe to use. So who do you think won this tournament, 10 versus 10?
I have a feeling that the answer is going to be counterintuitive. So,
Well, obviously, I guess,
so
what would you think logically?
okay, so this is the two different sides are
Japanese Jiu-Jitsu,
Japanese
which
Jiu-Jitsu,
has very lethal techniques.
very lethal techniques.
Judo, which has safe techniques, but due to that, they can do sparring.
I would have imagined the lethal techniques.
Yeah.
I would have imagined lethal techniques won because in my head I'm thinking if someone got you into a stressful position. But then I guess if they're learning lethal techniques, it would have been difficult to organize the competition. Because how would you be able to...
I don't know what the rules of engagement were.
Okay.
I need to double check that. But yeah, but you would say, but logically, the lethal.
Logically lethal ones.
So it turned out that I think 9 out of 10 were Judo wins. And the theory is that even if their techniques were less lethal, they're used to doing it in adrenaline and sparring and resisting opponents, and they're probably way stronger and fitter. They probably have cauliflower ear. They're probably used to someone grabbing their gi, the suit they wear. Whereas the traditional jiu-jitsu guys, they were doing self-defense, lethal techniques, so they can never do it against a resisting opponent. They have to do it in patterns or drills, whereas judo will be completely freeform. Someone grab you from any angle, someone try and throw you, you're resisting it. So when it came to the competition, however this competition was arranged, judo guys were just on it way quicker because they just even though in theory they had only safe techniques, it turned out they were better able to execute them. And a good example is boxing. Boxing as well. I don't know how many moves it has. It has a jab, a cross, a hook, and an uppercut. Where boxing is one of the highest rated combat sports in the world, and there's 4 moves. But you're so effective at dodging kinetic force coming at you and leashing out kinetic force that you're such a danger to other people if you're a good boxer. Like I would personally put more money on a good boxer than someone who's done traditional martial arts or self-defense martial arts for 20 years. Someone who's boxed for 3 years, I'd put more money on them.
What if it was the classic boxing versus jiu-jitsu in a street fight?
If I had to put money, I'd put jiu-jitsu because that's what the data shows. The data so we have UFC, which started, or mixed martial arts, cage fighting. And in the early days, we didn't have it like it is today, where you mix, every athlete knows all the styles, or the main styles, which are Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. These are considered the 4 key styles. There are some exceptions. Maybe you could replace wrestling with sambo or judo. But basically, some striking a striking style, a takedown style, and a grappling style. You need one of these. You need each of these in your arsenal. But in the olden days, when this started, I think the 80s, people were coming in as purists. So someone comes in from sumo, someone comes in from Muay Thai, someone comes in from karate. And during using this data, they found out that jiu-jitsu was the most effective. Maybe you can argue these were rigged. I don't know. Who knows? There are many conspiracy theories and whatever, maybe this happened, that happened, but generally speaking, it's agreed that jiu-jitsu proved itself as an effective style. Because let's say you did karate or taekwondo for 10 years, you can kick my head off in 5 seconds. You're so flexible, you're so fast. The minute I hug you, as in grip you, you've lost 10 years of your training. We can't. You've trained this kick 100 times. All I have to do is rush up to you and hug you, and you can't do anything. Whereas that's where jiu-jitsu shines. And if you look at a lot of fights, they'll end up clinching or grabbing or going to the floor. It's quite common statistically. That being said, there's always a chance the boxer will knock out this jiu-jitsu guy out.
Yep, for sure.
So,
although you would imagine in a kind of public scenario, oftentimes maybe like the highest stats of day-to-day fights is in a pub or outside a pub or around bar environments. It's often crowded, lots of objects. So getting the reach for boxing might be difficult. But also, you're already in the hugging distance. You're already in that zone.
But I'd say actually in all these 4 styles, boxing, Thai boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu are valuable. I think you can't go wrong with any of these. I think statistically the most effective is wrestling now. I think it's taken over jiu-jitsu as the most effective combat sport. So 9 out of, I don't know what the data is now, but it's approximately, this is quite accurate, 90% of UFC champions come from wrestling. They don't come from jiu-jitsu. They don't come from boxing. And they don't come from Thai boxing. So they don't just do wrestling. They do boxing, they do Thai boxing, but the bulk of their martial arts training career was wrestling focused. And then as some, maybe they learned, 6-month jiu-jitsu crash course, whatever, or 2 years they've been training jiu-jitsu. But the foundation of who they are as a combat athlete is wrestling. That tends to have the highest chance of victory. But to me, logically makes sense. Let's say we have person X and person Y. Person X is the boxer, person Y is jiu-jitsu. X wins if the fight stays standing. Y wins if the fight goes to the ground. Now, who dictates if the fight stays standing or on the ground? Is the better wrestler. So if the boxer has the better wrestler, he can prevent the jiu-jitsu guy from taking him down. And if the jiu-jitsu guy has the better wrestling, he can take down the boxer at will. Yeah. So there's a bit of, that's why probably maybe wrestling has such a big. Also, wrestling competition scene is much more intense than the other combat sports competition.
Intense.
It's like, yeah, as in they're just constantly cutting weight. They're constantly competing year round, especially in American schools. It's called collegiate wrestling. It's very intense. In Europe, we have something called freestyle and Greco wrestling. There's 2 styles. In Greco, you can't grab the legs. In freestyle, you can grab the legs, so you can tackle.
Which tends to be more popular in Europe? Do you know?
I don't know about that.
Okay,
yeah.
maybe
they're both pretty
by country as well.
I mean, neither is that popular because you wear singlets and you look pathetic, right?
Yeah, I've always wondered why that. I do not. Yeah. Do you know anything about the history of that? Or
I don't know why. Maybe from the Olympic Games in Greece. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe ages ago, but they look ridiculous. But they're the toughest guys on the planet. So
yeah.
But I think because MMA is so popular, there'll be an uplift in wrestling. So let's say I'm an MMA fan. I have a son. I'll put him into wrestling, right?
Gotcha.
Is that what you're saying?
I was going to say you put them into MMA training because it's fair enough to say that in London, sometimes there are MMA schools and they're like a blend of different things, so they can be taught wrestling.
Yes,
but they don't have to have the get up.
That is really common now, where you learn wrestling as part of your MMA curriculum. So when you sign up to an MMA gym, usually you have a timetable, and there'll be jiu-jitsu class, boxing class, wrestling class, Thai boxing, and in that wrestling class, you won't have to wear the singlet. It's only if you compete. If you compete in wrestling, you'll need to wear it. But if you're just... I think in America, they're changing the rules a bit. They're changing the uniform to make it a bit more...
appealing.
But that's not happening in the Olympics yet.
Interesting.
But I think MMA is giving them some clout now. They're becoming... Like if you were a real MMA fan and you heard, this guy's doing wrestling, you're not going to think, he's got a ridiculous uniform. You're going to think, this guy's the toughest guy I know. Yep. So it's changing now, I think. But to answer your original question, I would say the best bang for your buck... all these 4 are good. I'll go for the benefits of all 4 quickly. For boxing, you're using your very fast hands, quick hands, great reflexes, and usually you're wearing tight clothes, so you're probably not going to be kicking someone, right? So boxing is just very effective. It's very good for self-defense. Also, your distance management, you're going to be in and out. Your footwork is great. Then you have Thai boxing, which adds a few more layers. So Muay Thai is the art of 8 limbs. That's what it translates to, I think. And that's where you can use your elbows, you can use your legs, you can use your knees, and you can clinch. So clinch is when you're hugging someone standing. And that's a bit more realistic because a lot of fights will be in that close range, as you mentioned.
Clinch as well.
Exactly. The downside is that the boxing specialist is so good in his hands that maybe you would never even need to clinch because he's so effective. I mean, we're assuming we're fighting someone who has no training, right? And a pro boxer is just going to knock him out. But if we assume someone's bigger than you, stronger than you, then it's a bit tougher. But anyway, so Muay Thai has a bit more weapons at your use, but because of that, you're deteriorating. It's like jack of all trades versus specialist. You have 8 weapons, with a boxer just has 2, but he's much better at them. But then the Muay Thai can kick you, he can knee you, elbow, clinch, trip you. Then you have wrestling, which, as I said earlier, statistically, probably based on the data, is the most effective combat sport. And if you look at some really good, there's a lot of self-defense channels where they're testing, where they wear armor, they wear gear, and they come with a knife, and there's like something called the self-defense championships on YouTube. Cool. I really recommend the watch.
Okay, nice.
Where they get all these big YouTube martial arts stars and they make them do different things. And you look at the self-defense situations and they'll end up being some form of messy wrestling. That's what it ends up being somehow, always. So if you're a good wrestler, you can just pick someone up, slam him on concrete.
Cool. When you say messy wrestling, as in like it's wrestling but with an element of having a knife.
Well, like, little knife, like dirty wrestling, like little punches in the stomach, whatever, But wrestling is the core of it. And then what makes jiu-jitsu so great is that jiu-jitsu uses leverage and it's all on the ground. And what's beautiful about, let's say you're on crazy drugs and you don't feel any pain. If I punch you in the face, you ignore the pain. If I hit you in the nuts, as self-defense, you ignore the pain.
Yep.
But you cannot ignore having your arm broken. You can't ignore being choked out unconscious. I don't care if you can't feel the pain. If I break your arm, you can't use it.
This was one of the big things in Krav Maga that they were always saying is is assuming that the only damage you can do is something that's going to stop or incapacitate them in some way.
Yeah. So pain can be ignored, but you can't ignore having a limb broken. You can't ignore being taken down and pinned to the floor. You can't ignore being choked unconscious. So that's, I think, the beauty of jiu-jitsu. And jiu-jitsu is probably the only style that's really proven where a smaller person can beat a bigger person. But I still think this is quite exaggerated. You get a huge steroid-filled guy and a young girl. I don't think anything's happening.
Yeah, for sure. Or even the guy who played the Mountain in Game of Thrones versus Conor McGregor, where he's like dancing around and the Mountain just one hit would.
There's weight classes for a reason, right? But assuming normal situation, average sized people, I think any of these four are great. I personally like jiu-jitsu because also you mentioned what for safety as well. Jiu-jitsu, your chance of injury is probably lower than being punched in the face. Brain damage. I broke my nose 4 times. That's not going to happen in jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
So I think,
and you could do that for a long term. Like in theory, you could do Brazilian jiu-jitsu or jiu-jitsu for a long time. Without getting injured pretty much at all.
I think you have some knee pain, some back pain, maybe some fingers from grabbing, but generally, no big like concussion or anything like this.
Yeah, whereas in boxing, concussion, and even if you're just getting hit, the long-term damage around like dementia and early onset Alzheimer's definitely plays a factor.
There is one caveat: it's very common to say called boxer size. And if you know about this, where you go to a gym, say gym box, popular gym. It's got clients that don't want to have black eyes. Maybe they're just all corporate world blue. Is it blue collar?
White collar.
Yeah, white collar people, and they just come in there. They just do pad work, or they hit the.
Yeah. Where in that case, it's more like fitness rather than
exactly.
So it'd be very difficult to translate that into someone would win a street fight. I mean, in theory, you could imagine, you've gone from the elite end of the spectrum to like the entry level end of the spectrum, which is if someone's just practice against pads. Versus judo or maybe even karate or something, maybe practicing against pads gives you like some extra edge versus someone who hasn't done anything but minimal.
So yes, I would say that's my answer on the question. That there are other ways to train striking, but generally like we said, the pad exercise version, same with Thai boxing, but I think jiu-jitsu is probably a bit safer, good bang for your buck. If you were a bit younger, depending on the age, I'd say wrestling. If it's an older person, I'd say maybe jiu-jitsu.
Nice.
Wrestling's a bit intense.
From a pure enjoyment factor, which do you enjoy most?
I think jiu-jitsu has the most variety. It's constantly changing. I don't know much new boxing, Muay Thai techniques. I've not seen many. Maybe purists who are really big fans of these sports. There's this new strike, this new kick. Whereas jiu-jitsu, there's new submissions, new takedowns, new ways of holding someone. Like what would traditionally might have been an inferior position. Maybe someone discovered a way to choke someone from that inferior position. And then you add the gi to it, it makes it a whole another layer. Because there's no gi and gi jiu-jitsu with the suit, without the suit.
Yep.
And then with the suit, you have all these different lapel, chokes, different grips. So I think jiu-jitsu is the most evolving. What I like about jiu-jitsu is, let's say you tap me out or something, I might go home that night on YouTube and type in counter that move. And next time you do it, I know how to counter it. Whereas boxing, I just need to become stronger, I need to become quicker, I need to become faster. But jiu-jitsu, I can think, I see one video and my whole game's changed tomorrow. Gotcha. I think that's fun.
Yeah,
you still need to be fit, you still need to be strong, you still need to train. But I think there's a bit more of a cerebral aspect to it.
Cerebral aspect.
That I like.
Nice. That. Okay, so one book which you've mentioned to me a number of times that has a bit influence on you, Atomic Habits. What are your thoughts on that? How have you applied to it to your real life? Or rather, what's like the key number one takeaways of the book for you, and how have you applied that to your life?
Okay. I think I'd answer it a bit differently, if that's okay. For me, because
sure.
For me, I would say I was actually doing a lot of the atomic stuff organically. As you said, when you met me, you felt I had a wide range of interests. And I think the advice in Atomic Habits is needed to have a wide range of interests. I'll get to that in a second. But I think what Atomic Habits really gave me is a language to express what I'm doing to other people. I didn't have the ability to say, when someone said, wow, you're doing so many things, I didn't have the ability to articulate how I'm doing it. I think Atomic Habits empowered me to tell my friends, this is what you can do. And it gave me a better model when I'm adding new things into my life to add them in effectively. So that's the one way I would change it. But to answer your actual question, I think the two things are I think it's like Kaizen, the 1% change, where when he has the British cycling team in the example, you read the book,
Yep.
The case study in the beginning where they just improved everything by the British cycling team, every aspect by 1%, and then the whole team becomes the best.
Oh, marginal gains.
Yeah, the marginal gains, exactly. So small compound interest, marginal gains, that really touched me. So I'm learning Korean now. I don't think, I need to be fluent in Korean by tomorrow. I just think, let me just be consistent, 30 minutes a day of practice. This is going to be mind-blowing, but the me 1 year in the future is going to be so much better than me now at speaking Korean.
Yeah.
Just by having those small incremental gains. But also the reverse. I think if you don't improve something, it will get worse and worse. So I think that's a big thing.
I think that reverse is often not considered.
Yeah, and I think that's huge as well. So what am I doing that's making myself worse, or what am I not doing? So let's say I'm not training, or what am I doing? Am I eating junk food? And then the opposite. What can I do to constantly improve? And whenever I see a big task, I don't think that's impossible. I just think let me just break it down into chunks.
Nice. I like this. This is 100% one of my favorite things of the to-do list is just break it down to the smallest possible thing.
And I think because I've read so many books, we've read so many chats, I can't remember what's atomic habits and what's not atomic habits.
Yeah. Feel free to.
What I've done, and this maybe you can correct me, and this isn't from the book, is when I pick up a new hobby, the first thing I check is how far is it from where I live. If it's not within a 30-minute commute, I know I won't stick to it. So I think unless I'm obsessed, anything that's not within a particular radius, commutable radius, I'm just not going to pick up because I'm not going to stick to it. Unless, like I said, unless I'm really curious and it's the only option. So that's one thing I sort of gained from that book, but I don't know if that book advises that or if I just picked that up somehow from the book. Another thing I think is habit stacking. So doing doing things in a certain order. So when I wake up, I make sure I do this. I have my clothes ready the night before. Building certain systems in place.
I spoke to someone recently who has very strong ADHD, and he said this was, habit stacking or trying to like group habits together that he would normally get distracted from. It's one of the biggest ways he's stuck to a lot of different health goals. For instance, so instead of thinking, in the morning I've got to take vitamin D, I've got to take X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, I've got to take my supplements as like one group and making it as easy as possible to take them all together rather than it be like 7 different jars or whatever.
You just reminded me what I was trying to think of. So when it was logistics, it wasn't I think what I got from the book was making it as easy as possible. Whatever I need to do, I just minimize, rather than thinking, how can I do it? I'm thinking, what's stopping me from doing it and taking those. And I actually learned more from his newsletter after the book, maybe than even, I think his newsletter is fantastic. I think it's one of the best newsletters I've subscribed to. One of the few I make sure to read and pay attention to. And it's more that I'm taking away things. So, like you said, rather than, because I take about loads of supplements too, so maybe you can put them all in a box and it's got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you take it all in one go. You made it easier rather than unboxing each one every time. But one caveat to play devil's advocate is I'm not actually that into habits as a concept. I really want to live consciously. So I don't want to do, even if it's a good thing, I don't want to do it compulsively. So I'm naturally a bit resistant to the habit. So and this is a personal thing. This is not a...
Okay, this is super interesting. Yeah. Why is that?
So I'm personally I don't want to think in the habit stacking structure because I want every decision, every breath, every thought, every act I do to be a conscious act. And habit by its nature is compulsive and unconscious. Even if it's a good habit, the fact that I'm not thinking about it is something I don't want to be. I want to make every choice a conscious choice, just because I'm very into yoga and meditation.
Could you not still make a habit conscious? And maybe in some ways that is the obstacle to overcome. Is to do something which is habit, which is compulsive, but still do it in a conscious way.
Because I guess and once again, maybe this is more of a definitions discussion. I guess when I think of habit, I think it's like it's almost programmed. I don't think I just wake up, brush my teeth. I'm not thinking. So I guess anything that's in that nature, even if it's beneficial, like brushing my teeth is beneficial to me, it's just not something I'm looking to cultivate. I'm not saying that I don't behave habitually. Obviously, I'm a human being, but I'm striving to live where everything is I would like to be where every breath I'm conscious of. I'm not saying this is how I live, just to be clear. 100%. So that's why I kind of shy away from the habit stacking philosophy, because it's not what I'm trying to cultivate.
Do you have an example or a counterintuitive example of something that you maybe haven't done that generally people would have thought is good, but you're actually like, no, this does not fit my value set of wanting to live more consciously in these sorts of areas?
I think trying to program things as habits. So I'm constantly trying to habit breaks. When I wake up, the first thing I do is I'm having a shower, and all of a sudden I make it cold, just because it's not saying no cell in my body is saying make this water cold. Nothing in me wants this to happen. Or waking up 2 hours earlier to do a complex physical yoga and breathing technique pattern, which I have to be completely focused on. Or before you eat, you wait 10 seconds before you eat. Instinct is to grab the food. So it's constant pattern breaking. It's part of the Eastern style, because there's something called karma, which translates as memory or action. And they say if you behave out of your karma, it's like you're compulsively behaving. So they say, like in the traditional Indian medicinal view, or like you have like the astrologers people that predict your life, and this whole style. And it's what they try. The claim is that because of your karmic patterns, they can predict from patterns. And anyone on the spiritual path, in theory, you shouldn't be able to predict them, because you can't predict a conscious being, because they're behaving. They're just responding, and they're not reacting. They're responding. So these are just stories. I'm not saying
these are super interesting. No, I really find that. Do you have other examples of how someone could pattern break? And what's interesting is immediately in my head, I was going to ask the question, is there any way that you can create a habit of pattern breaking? Which is like in itself maybe a bit counterintuitive, but also could definitely help with things around like, using social media or just these other sorts of behaviors that we don't necessarily want to reduce to zero, but we potentially want to reduce. And oftentimes it just comes to habitually scrolling onto Instagram, and you just find yourself on Instagram. Whereas if you get into a habit of pattern breaking, maybe you have a bit more conscious control over that.
Another one is whenever you speak, whatever you're about to say, can you say it in 50% fewer words? That's another one. Can you just minimize gossiping? You only speak when you need to speak. It's a bit boring now, that one. But having a break before eating, waiting to eat, maybe not eating whilst watching TV. You eat completely in silence, just completely focus on the food. Giving complete attention to someone. So normally when I'm talking to someone at a party and there's a pretty girl walking past, and I'll force myself to give my friend undivided attention, even though every cell of my being is saying, I want to go talk to this cute girl, whatever, that's standing there at the party. I think the complex, very specific, complex yoga practices in the morning, which you do not want to do when you wake up. When that alarm rings at 5 a.m., you're like, why am I doing this? So I think that is one other one. Eating in a particular way. And also another thing is in this tradition, there's a whole diet. It's called a sattvic diet. There's a whole way of eating that makes it conducive for this way of living as well.
What would be that sort of diet?
There's no onion, no garlic, no chili, no caffeine, no alcohol. 50% raw food if you can. So fresh food. If you're a monk, you probably have more raw food, maybe 90 to 100% raw food. There was one more example I wanted to give. I can't remember what it was now.
And when you've been on various like ashrams, silent retreats also, if I understood correctly, at these places, do you tend to eat this diet? And what is that?
You eat a diet. Yeah, and your sleep quota will go down significantly. Your ability to sit in stillness will go down.
Your sleep quota will go down.
Yeah, because when it comes to diet, we diet for different reasons. So let's say if I wanted to become a bodybuilder, I would eat in a particular way. That doesn't mean that diet is better or worse than another diet. That diet may not be good for your health, but it'll be great for looking amazing, assuming a bodybuilder is what you consider to be an amazing look. Then for the yogic lifestyle, there's a desire to sit in stillness for long periods of time. And due to this, they've over the years have discovered, or I don't know how, but they've said these are the foods that we suggest if you want to do this. This makes your body most conducive for that experience.
Most conducive to sitting for long periods.
Long periods of stillness, being receptive to deep inner experiences, sleeping less. What the studies are on this, the modern studies, I don't know. But according to the yogic system, this is the diet. That's something called Ayurveda, which is traditional Indian medicine. Another version called Siddha. And then there's yoga. And within these, they have what they propose. How much this aligns with modern research, I'm not clear on. I'm not up to date on that. But they propose this with the intent that if you want to live this particular lifestyle, it's not an ethical diet. It's not, you don't eat meat because meat is bad for you. According to their system, vegetables, a plant still competes for survival. A plant reproduces, differently, of course. A plant breathes. A plant fights for resources. It competes for sun. You put two trees and they'll compete. So it's not a question of ethics. It's just that for this system, we've discovered that this food is the most conducive for what you want to do. I wanted to bring another point on the pattern breaking, is even sitting in a particular way. So obviously we're sitting in chairs now. Whereas if I was in India, I would sit cross-legged in a very particular way. Because even your body language indicates your conscious state. For example, if I have a blind person, their body language will be the same as a person with vision if they have a certain emotion. A blind person will cross their arms. They've never seen someone crossing their arms. They haven't learned that from watching, right? So certain states of consciousness are mimicked by a certain state of your body and your body language. But the inverse is true as well. If you hold your body in a certain state, after a while your conscious state will also change. For example, you have the common business advice to put your hands akimbo before going to a meeting.
The power pose.
The power pose.
Power poses.
So the same way the system of yoga have identified particular poses where if you hold them for a significant amount of time, it raises your consciousness. So that's where that logic comes from. Also, the breathing techniques. If someone is angry, what's the first thing you say to them? Take a deep breath. You don't need to be a trained psychologist to say take a deep breath. So on the other hand, There's also an assumption that there's a link between your breath and your mental structure. So the breathing techniques are very important as well. Another reason why I wanted to fix my broken nose, because I couldn't do the practices. So that's another form of pattern breaking, is the practices themselves have a way of breaking these patterns. So that's why, long convoluted story, I'm not that into the habit stacking stuff, but I think it's really cool, and I think it's obviously effective.
But no, it's interesting touching more on the yogic ashram aspect. In terms of your first interest in, let's say, yogic practices broadly defined, where did that come from? Was it just yourself? Was there a family aspect? And then also, what was the thing that made you want to do something fairly extreme, like a silent retreat?
So I think you're familiar with the hero's journey.
But
yeah, okay. So for those that don't know, so the hero's journey is a common formula that many stories go by, where there's a hero who lives in a village. Something will happen to force that hero to leave their village. Some drastic calamity. Say Luke Skywalker lives in Tatooine. The Empire comes, kill his aunt and uncle. Yes, and I'll leave. He will usually find a mentor, a wizard of some kind. Obi-Wan. Luke finds Obi-Wan. Then he'll be trained for some time. He'll fight the villain, and he'll probably lose. Which happens. Luke loses his hand. He loses. He'll then go back to complete his training, further training. He then beats the villain. Luke beats Darth Vader. He goes back to where he came from, and he's happily ever after. What doesn't happen in Star Wars, but usually happens, is he'll get a love interest or he'll get loads of wealth. And with those additions, he then goes back to where he came from, but now he's in elevated status. So he left where he came from, he comes back, they're the same, but he or she is now higher. I can't remember the exact formula, but something maybe you remember better than I do. What I found so unique about Star Wars, and to me as a young child, Luke Skywalker was the coolest ever, is that the hero was a monk. He had no love interest and no wealth. But to me, he was the coolest character ever. So that didn't make sense. Back then, I didn't care about women or money when I was 7. But as you got older, of course, I cared about finding an attractive partner who I really resonate with, having wealth, having financial freedom. All these things are important to many people. But still, somewhere in my head, as I was aging, I felt the coolest character as a monk. What am I missing? And of course, Luke meditates, and Luke finds a teacher. There's the two things that's really important in Star Wars, the Jedi, is that they have a teacher. They do inner practices as much as they do external practices. You see Luke doing gymnastics, you see Luke training with the lightsaber, but you also see him meditating and being in stillness. And in that universe, that's seen as just as important, or if not more important, than the external work. If anything, the inner work sort of empowers the external. So from this, I thought, how can I become like this? I didn't realize that Star Wars was actually based on Japanese cinema back then. Jedi wear kimono. They have swords. Darth Vader has samurai armor. There's an emperor, there's a shogun.
So what is it? What is Star Wars based off / inspired by?
It's called Akira Kurosawa, which is a very famous Japanese director. And George Lucas fell in love with Japanese cinema. And this is not a theory. He admits this. This is all outspoken by him himself. And then this heavily inspired Star Wars. This guy's films, maybe more Japanese cinema, but especially Akira Kurosawa's work. He made Seven Samurai, very famous film. Really recommend his films. Anyway, so this was very cool because you basically have this Eastern story masquerading as a sci-fi film. You have the space wizard samurai monk as the main character, like this Buddhist monk traveling around. So that triggered me in a way that I knew that I had to find some way of going inwards, or I would never be as cool as my hero. Subconsciously that somehow stayed in my head. And then so I got into gymnastics because the Jedi do cool acrobatics. I got into martial arts.
What age are we talking now?
Now I was probably 15, 14. So maybe a bit younger. Got into gymnastics, learned backflips, all these cool things. Then I learned martial arts. I was into sword fighting as well, but I think just hand-to-hand martial arts is a bit more accessible, and you don't really walk around with a sword anymore. So I got into martial arts like Kung Fu, then eventually into Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, wrestling, boxing. But then the part of me was always seeking some inner practice. And because I'm half Indian, I'm quite exposed to Hinduism and Buddhism. So naturally I started reading about Buddhist texts.
When you say you're exposed to Hinduism and Buddhism, is it both equally, one more than the other?
I'd say Hinduism a bit more, but they're so close in India. It's so intertwined that it's not like here where you have Christianity, Catholicism, Islam. There are places where it is really like that, but a lot of Indian cultures, like it's all blended.
That's really
depends. Some people we speak to, they will be very hardcore. But there are many pockets where it's just like, you're just seeking enlightenment. I don't care how you find it. That's like the vibe.
I like that.
Whatever it takes. One guy worships a cow, one guy worships a stone, one guy worships the sun, but all they really care about is breaking their karma in some way, breaking compulsive patterns. That's what they're trying to seek. And because the British colonized India, it became more structured as religions, but originally these were all practices, right? You'd have to find a teacher in person. He or she would teach you, initiate you into a practice. You then do these breathing techniques. It wasn't that, I believe this and now I'm happy. You have to strive and work to some perception was the most important quality. You need to perceive more than you perceive now. Anyway, so I was getting into this, but then I didn't have a live teacher. And there's someone who's very famous on YouTube now called Sadhguru. So before he was famous, as he is now, he did a live talk. And I went to his live talk and I just said, whatever you're doing, I have to do. So I do not care. Whatever practice you tell me to sit in silence for 10 days. I just realized that I was like Luke finally finding Yoda. So I have to do this. And then did a 7-day program and I hated every second.
Oh, really?
So what am I doing here, man?
And 7 days of...
like sitting cross-legged, doing breathing techniques, listening to videos about food and how to just like uncovering your mental processes and different things like this. And then you get initiated into a practice. And then I was really struggling. I couldn't sit cross-legged on the floor. I was always angry. But then before I knew it, I went to the bottom of my school grades, the top of my school grades in 6 months. Because all the yoga practices work on the base of your spine and your neurosensory system flows through your spine. So I think the combination of the breathing techniques and building up my system sort of awakened. And actually, the imagery of yoga is a lotus on blossoming, right? So somehow that's because it's all in the spine or health. All the classical yoga practices. I'm not talking about gym yoga. I've never done yoga in a gym in my life. This is a classical form of yoga where there's a...
What would you call this classical form of yoga?
So the whole...
If someone wanted to like YouTube it afterwards.
Yeah, so this particular lineage is called Isha Yoga. But within Isha Yoga, they're teaching 2 types. One is called Hatha Yoga. Ha means sun and moon. You might see the yin and yang, masculine and feminine. So in yoga, it's very important that as a human being, your masculine and feminine are balanced. A lot of the imageries of a sun and a moon, yin and yang, a man and a female half each. And that was very important from a spiritual perspective. I'm not talking about business. I'm not talking about dating. That's different. But in terms of if I'm not interacting with anyone else, in the yoga system, I should be masculine and feminine balance. Maybe if I'm courting a woman, I might amp up the masculinity. Maybe if I'm making a pitch to a business. But within yourself, there's no one looking, you're by yourself, you should be balanced. That's the goal. So that's called the Hatha, and that's the physical postures. And most of Western yoga will be an offshoot of this Hatha, where you do poses and stuff.
Gotcha.
Then there's the Kriya Yoga. Kriya is opposite of the word karma.
On that first one, would you say some of these poses are difficult, physically demanding in some way? Maybe they require like at least some degree of flexibility. But when you do them, are they the ones that you would be able to do for a significant amount of time with stillness, or would they be more kind of movement based?
So there's different. So my total practice takes 5 hours. So there's a lot of variety. Like I usually alternate practices. There are some practices I have to do every day. Some I will alternate. Some I only do if I have time. So some of them are more movement based, more dynamic, more like a fitness routine that you'd imagine. But using the geometry is very important. Like how you stand, how you sit. Even my fingers like this, every detail is looked at. Then there are some where you hold postures at the most 3 minutes. You wouldn't hold for that long. For the long durations, you'll be sitting cross-legged or sitting on your shins. You know how Japanese people sit. It's called Vajrasana. Or you sit in a cross-leg posture, it's called Ardha Siddhasana. So for the longer period, you'll be sitting in a meditative posture. When you're holding the postures, it'll be a bit more dynamic. You're going through a very, very particular detailed sequence. It wouldn't be random. Because the sequence of the postures is how the system activates itself. Every detail is looked at. It's not like, I feel like doing this posture because my shoulder hurts. No, you do the whole sequence. This is the classical style, right? This is very different too. So all the health things, like my back pain, my shoulder pain, my brain becoming more competent, all these things are byproducts. The main thing is you're doing these practices for a particular purpose. And all the health benefits, it's like using a plane to drive to your school. Yes, a plane can be used to fix your back pain, to drive to your school, using the metaphor, but the plane is actually designed to take you off. But you do all these other things are byproducts. But the main thing of yoga is that you're becoming a conscious being. Like every decision is your choice. There's actually a really good story with the Buddha. He's walking, and supposedly he had a nice, because like I said, the feminine, masculine, he has a gentle gait about him. His walk is very pleasant. And his Hindu priest saw this beautiful man walking, the Buddha, and they said, "Oh, you're such a great, graceful human being. Why don't you join us in our prayers?" And he said, "What prayers are you doing?" "We're praying to get to heaven." He's like, "What is this heaven you speak of?" "There's no problems. Everything is taken care of. You'll be completely happy. You don't need to worry about anything." He said, "In that case, teach me a prayer to get to hell." They're like, "Why?" He's like, "At least there I can make a difference." But the point of the story is that he's decided he's in a blissful state, so it doesn't matter where he is. That's the point. That's the parable, is that he's not looking for an external situation to feel like in heaven. It's within him. He's decided he's going to be like this. And that's the point of being a conscious being, that you decide your experience of life. And ironically, then you can actually help people. If you're fighting your own brain every day, how are you going to want to help anyone else? So I thought it was a really cool story.
That's an interesting point, because I was having a discussion with a friend recently who they were specifically talking about their received view of Buddhism. their received view of Buddhism was that it was quite insular, quite introverted, and that people were very pushed along the monastic path. My view was that that wasn't the case, and that the monastic path, in some ways similar to Christianity, is a certain aspect of the religion, but it's not necessarily how it would be day to day. They still have families and procreate and all these other kind of quote unquote normal things that are not traditionally monk-like. How would that potentially fit into what you're saying? And then we can go back to these different aspects of yoga, which is...
Just to clarify, I'm talking about the Buddha from a perspective of someone into yoga, not as a Buddhist practitioner. So I'm not a Buddhist as a religious follower.
Yep.
For me, the Buddha is an example of a yogi in history. A yogi is someone who's... So the word Buddha Buddhi means intellect, and Da means beyond. So Buddha's a title, it's not his name. His name is Gautama, right?
Yep.
But his title is Buddha because he's living beyond...
How did you pronounce it there? In my head, it was, Siddhartha Gautama.
I mean, I don't know. Siddhartha Gautama. I don't know.
Gautama.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, interesting. I heard a different pronunciation.
I don't know. I would say Gautama.
Gautama.
But I'm not from Nepal, so I don't know. I don't know how the Nepalese would... I don't know, is he from Nepal or a bit below? I'm not sure which part of India he's from. Yeah, I don't know the correct pronunciation of his name. But anyway, that's not his name is not Buddha, right? That's what I'm trying to get at. Wait, how do you pronounce it? How do you say it?
Siddhartha, which I think, as I say it out loud...
I think it's anglicized.
It sounds... Immediately as I said it out loud, sounds anglicized. But in my head, it was Siddhartha Gautama. But...
That's the anglicized version. So I'll say Siddhartha Gautama. That's
interesting.
Yeah. But then we're speaking English, so...
Yeah, for sure. But it was nice to add that.
Yeah. It's like, someone that says that one French word in a strong French accent.
Exactly.
Like, chill out, big man. Yeah, so I'm not coming this from a Buddhist practitioner perspective. And also Buddhism spread all over Asia. I don't know if you know the monk who brought it to Asia. His name is Bodhidharma. He brought martial arts to China as well. That's why they do Kung Fu. He brought martial arts from South India to China because the monks were getting fat. And then...
This monk is also the same monk behind is the Dhammapada? Or...
I don't know.
Oh, okay. No worries. I don't want to interrupt this point.
Yeah. Anyways, so I see the Buddha as an example of what a being on the yoga path can be. I'm not following Buddhism as...
After a quick memory card break, we're back. And the question is... Monks, yoga.
Yeah.
We briefly touched on Buddhism. You can either continue the point around Buddhism or you can go into the different parts of yoga.
Yeah. So I'll quickly finish the monk. So one thing is interesting is that monks are differently seen in the East than they are in the West. In the East, they're seen as giving. In the West, they're seen as giving up something. In the East, they're seen as transcending something. That they've had a deep experience of some divine experience, some blissful state. They're so greedy that they won't settle for lower pleasures. They want the biggest pleasure. So a monk...
And would it be defined as a pleasure in that sense?
When it's not that a pleasure is maybe higher perception, they're in a certain state, that in that state a byproduct of blissfulness and pleasure might be there. There are states called samadhi. So the Buddha actually discarded these states. He said these are also just things you get attached to. He went through all these states. You may hear of monks who live in the Himalayas for years without eating, without drinking. There are even some documentaries on these people. So these are called different states of samadhi. But my point is they've had such a deep experience, whatever it is. I've not experienced it, so I'm only speaking from what I've gleaned information, not from experience, which is always something I try to avoid. But what I'm trying to say is that a monk in the West and the East are very different. A monk in the East is someone that they want this because it's they don't want anything else to distract them. They want that. Whereas in the West, I guess I'm not saying how it is for the monks in the West, but I think how society treats monks in the West is they've given up something. They've renounced something. Whereas no, in the East, they're just so greedy that only the peak pleasure settles them. So that's a very different narrative of looking at it. So I just wanted to clarify that. And the Buddha's disciples, from what I knew, they were all monks when he was alive, and they couldn't stay in one area for any period of time. I can't remember, maybe longer than a week or something. They had to always leave. They had to travel always, all his disciples, and that also helped Buddhism to spread. There's a fun story of one of his monks meeting a prostitute. I don't know if you know that.
No.
It's really cool. I don't want to say too many stories, but I'll just quickly...
Maybe let's dive into the story.
Okay, so in the monsoon season was the one exception where the Buddha's disciples, or his monks, were allowed to stay in one period of place. And this monk was staying in this town. I can't remember the exact details. And then a courtesan or some prostitute type lady was offered to host him. And the other monks think, oh man, he's going to stay in a prostitute's house? Is that... Or courtesan, whatever she is, something of this nature. Her house, is this really, really wise?
So this story of a Buddha.
Yeah.
Okay. This story about the Buddha's disciple
And the courtesan.
and the courtesan.
So the Buddha's disciples, they were monks, and that part of that was begging for food. So it's part of the rule that they wouldn't be a burden to villages and towns. They would have to constantly be on the move, except during the monsoon, where when it's rainy, it's hard to navigate through the jungles. So one of these disciples, I can't remember his name, he was staying in this town and he was begging for alms. And he was a tall, beautiful, handsome man in the story. And this courtesan comes up to him and says, "Hey, do you want to stay in my home during this monsoon season?" And he says, "Oh, I have to ask the Buddha first." He said, "Oh, you have to ask your guru? Okay." He's like, "Yes, I do." So he went to ask. He said, "This lady's invited me to her home." And the other monks were like, What the heck? His spirituality is crumbling. What is this?" And then the Buddha said, "No, you stay with this lady. She's invited you home. What's wrong?" So he goes to her house. And then throughout this time, all the other monks are whispering, "Oh, he's lost it. He's gone. That's it. He's no longer going to be on the path." And then she gives him a shawl because he's a bit cold. They're all whispering, "What's this? What's this?" She cooks for him. Normally they're just getting whatever they can get from their begging bowls, but she makes him a nice meal. They think that's it. He's gone. He's no longer going to be on this path. But he's carried on as normal. Then she dances and performs to him, and he watches just with utmost attention, looking at her dance. And all this happens. They're all losing faith in him. And then they complain to the Buddha, saying, "What is this? How can we let this happen?" Said, "Well, what was important to me on the spiritual path is whatever's the most powerful and effective, that's what we do. If what she's doing is more powerful and effective, even I would go to her for her services. But I believe what I'm doing is the most effective way."
Right.
So let him go. And later on,
that.
later on, two monks come back, him and the lady. So she becomes a monk as well. By the end of the story, they thought he would stop being a monk.
I like that.
But she comes back, shaved head with the robes. So he leaves the monk in the courtesan, and two monks come back. So that's a cool story. But the reason why I brought the story up was onto the monk monastic life, and in the East it was always seen as a great thing to become a monk. Actually, without the monks, when a spiritual master dies, say the Buddha were to die, or Sadhguru were to die now, or any of these yogis or Buddhas in history, it's the monks that keep the culture alive. It's thanks to the monks we're talking about meditation today, not thanks to the Buddha. It's the monks that spread it everywhere. I mean, of course, thanks to someone like the Buddha. So the monks are so integral to the spiritual movement staying alive. So that's why they're seen as so important in these societies. And actually, at one point in ancient India, 30% of the population were monks. But to answer your original question, whether Buddhism pushes monastic life, I don't know, because I'm not a Buddhist practitioner. I'm only coming at this approach from a yoga perspective and seeing him as a yogi in history. But definitely monks were revered, and they were seen as, they were just one-track mind. It's like, you have a long process to get somewhere, or you can go there as fast as possible. So that's what the monks were about, and preserving the culture for future generations. So that doesn't really answer your question. I don't know how it is in.
No, that makes sense. That's really interesting.
But from what
I think it's more interesting to hear your perspective on the yogi view on it, rather than necessarily that Buddhist specifically. Yeah. Cool. So we spoke about a courtesan, or however we define them. Your views on dating, particularly a topic that you and I have chatted a lot about, which is meeting, approaching people in person, women in our case, versus dating apps, which are great in some ways for meeting people, but also, like social media, have this kind of addictive element where you like keep going, and you definitely can make deep connections through there, but sometimes the ease and accessibility of it can lead you down more of a kind of hookup path, which is not necessarily bad, but it's like, again, to your point around like, are you consciously deciding that path, or are you just getting stuck doing the same thing, and you feel like you're maybe not progressing that area of your life? Where are you at with it?
So I would say definitely, I think apps are really hard if you want to be, well, at least if you are someone that has some social competency with women, and because I know there are many men 80% of men don't get matches. I don't want to insult these guys by saying, with apps you're going to sleep around all the time, because if 80% of men who would hear me say this would say, but I don't get any matches. And I don't want to insult these people. So we're coming at the context of someone that we're assuming is able to use apps to get matches. Right? We're going with that assumption.
That's actually a super important assumption, and maybe a whole nother tangent,
whole other topic.
Topic would be that.
What if you're not getting matches?
Yes,
how does that impact your self-worth? So that's a whole separate, which maybe we can get to if we have time. But in terms of to your point, I think if assuming you are able to get matches, I think it's very, if you're on the top 20% of people that does get matches, and maybe there's a spectrum there. Some people get it maybe a few weeks, some guys might get loads a day. I think it's actually very challenging to become monogamous when you're in that state because you have so many options. 90% of women are matching with you, and then you have all these options to pick from. The power dynamic really shifts in favor, I think, of guys that do get matches. And I think they can suffer because they don't develop relationship skills. They might just be sleeping around all the time. The app is designed to, you have that endorphin rush whenever you get a new text, whenever you complete a quest in a video game. I think it's almost a rush of the new. The allure of the new, I think, can be very, very tantalizing. I'm sure there are hundreds of guys that have girlfriends from apps. My ex-girlfriends have been from apps, so I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think that is a potential downside. Also, the apps are designed to monetize you. You are the product. So they're going to have ways of maybe limiting the quality of matches that match what you're looking for. Maybe give you matches that are less aligned with you. So you're getting girls, but you're constantly seeking something that more aligns with you. Whereas maybe organically, you would have just gone for that, whatever you align with straight away. Yeah, I think with apps, because it needs to monetize, I think there is an aspect of you may not get the best quality match. What I mean by best quality is in what you're looking for. Not that person A is better than person B, but you might get someone that aligns with you slightly, but you're not going to be satisfied. You might keep going back and back. Whereas organically, you might go for that person that really aligns with you and be happy. Also, because you're dating organically, you have less of a grass is greener syndrome to begin with. I think another thing is it takes away an aspect of, in this culture of boy to manhood transition. In lots of psychology they look at this, where there's some ritual that a boy has to go through to become a man, that lots of tribes will have. If you analyze tribes around the world, they'll probably have this ritual in part of their society. And I think part of this, not necessarily a structured ritual, but just that organically happens for a boy to man, is the ability to approach a beautiful woman and risk being embarrassed, risk being rejected. And I think not developing these skills is a bit detrimental to a man's evolution, to his growth. Then that being said, in India, the culture that I admire most greatly, classical India, they arranged the marriages. So there wasn't any of this. So there's no dating culture developed at all, which probably links to a lot of the issues between men and women in modern India.
Right.
Because there's generations of no court, there's zero generational history of courting. It was just your parents deciding for you. So now all of a sudden you're in Delhi, everyone's drunk, you have the freedom to speak to women, you don't know how to behave. You might do some weird stuff. You hear about these stories in India. That's a potential reason why. Anyway, really back to the West. Let's talk about India all the time.
Let's go down.
So I think for me personally, I sometimes struggle if I have had a girlfriend through apps. I'm thinking, but I haven't really gone through this ritual enough. I haven't gone enough of embarrassment and surpassing
the initial risk and adrenaline
that
rush.
risk. That being said, if you met the girl of your dreams, why would you not date her if you had every
True,
It's ridiculous,
for sure,
ridiculous
for sure.
pride. I can't tell if this is healthy thinking or pride thinking at this point. Keen to hear what you think on that.
Yeah, interesting. I think there's definitely something I instinctively feel around that, in terms of that initial time that you see someone and kind of lock on to them. In a healthy way. But when you notice someone and you're like, I 100% have to speak to them, that initial feeling is great, and it's essentially not there in the dating apps process. But as you said, when you meet someone on a dating app that actually you're like, wow, this is an incredible person. I wouldn't say that necessarily something is missing there, but it is a different experience.
There's the third experience of a friend becoming more than a friend. There's the other experience of you meeting someone organically, making something happen. Then there's the app, and I think these are all very unique experiences. But I think the key aspect to me is you developing certain skills. As long as you develop those skills, I don't think it really matters. The ability to face risk. You don't have to develop them in the dating space, right? You might, business-wise, you might develop risk, or in sports, Tim.
For sure.
So I think there are other ways you can develop these aspects, but I think the ability to approach a beautiful woman, or woman you find beautiful, I guess, whatever, is that I think it takes a lot for a man. I don't think women realize how scary it can be to go up to them in public and approach. And also, you hear so many stories of this guy is creepy. I was walking home late night, this guy spoke to me. So, or I'm in the office and there's power dynamics. I don't want to. There's so many things as a guy you need to think about that you don't have to think about on apps. This girl is single. She likes my profile. I like her profile. You don't have to take any risks anymore. You don't have to be awkward. You don't have to tread on toes. You don't have to learn to be graceful. Because I think it takes a lot of elegance.
Graceful is an interesting
Yes,
choice of words, was it?
I think you need to, because you are a stronger potential predator, right? That's how she can see you. So you need to. It's very. You're saying I want something from you. I find you beautiful and attractive, but you need to do it in a way that she feels safe
For sure.
and that
for sure.
you grace you, and to eventually go for it, and you realize, you know what, this is actually a really nice experience. Your testosterone's pumping up. You feel great. You message your friends. I just spoke to this beautiful girl on the train. I remember you inspired me to speak to a girl on the
Oh yeah.
train.
What was that one?
Well, I messaged you. I said, "There's this beautiful girl opposite me, and I'm reading a book." And I think you said something that you need to.
Oh,
speak
you
to
need
her.
to ascend to the next level.
Yeah, yeah.
This experience, you'll ascend to the yeah. And the 100% the thing which in my life, I think most the biggest. I'm not sure what age it would have been, but it actually probably would have been around like going to university time, where you suddenly got this freedom and meeting lots of people. What made me just really turn the switch and just be so much more natural with the approach, or comfortable with the approach, was something my sister said, which is like, if you assuming you don't get angry with them or even be rude or cold at the end, you've essentially just given them a nice compliment.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're like a chill person and you've gone up and spoken to someone, even if the interaction is ended with a I've got a boyfriend or whatever the social reason is, that's still like a nice little confidence boost for them.
Exactly. And I think women want to be swept off their feet. They want this romantic experience. And if they don't want it with you, at least you're doing it. You're gracefully, you're still complimenting them, as you said. Either you give them that amazing experience, that romantic movie that they want, or you give them a compliment. If you're doing it gracefully, it should be a win-win either way. So,
and what we'd probably need a woman's view here, but I wonder if there's you mentioned about like the rite of passage of a guy in some ways, or at least we certainly feel like this, or guys like us certainly feel like this. But it's a skill you need to cultivate, or something you need to overcome. Particularly when you're younger. But I wonder if there's also maybe some kind of rite of passage on the feminine side of like being able to receive and deal with that in increasingly mature but open ways, without so it's like open but also the ability to close it down,
know how to say no.
Knowing how to say no, but then also not being jaded by the experience. I think it's probably a lot harder from that perspective for at least us, I guess on the male side, the objective is maybe more clear in terms of your like to speak to them, to engage in conversation, whereas from the female side, there's a million different factors going on, and
I think for
kind of opened
female, there's the safety factor, which we don't have to deal with. That puts everything into a different perspective, which we don't have to deal with. But yeah, I do wonder if they have a rite of passage as well. That's interesting to ask someone.
Exactly. I think it's touched on like a controversial, not controversial, more spicy, not spicy. To touch on a more contrasting term is something that's used a lot on, I'd say, on social media, not necessarily in a dating space, but in like a self-development space. And we could touch on in a sec in terms of like on social media, how easy it is for self-development to fall into the kind of red pill, almost incel-esque community, and like where is the dividing line there? But a term that's often used, and I'd say in like the mainstream, is a term of like, you become a high value man, and what is a high value man, or a high value woman, but it's naturally like a problematic term in terms of if you just go into a random pub and start talking about, oh look, there's that high value woman, or this, I'm going after this, that, and the other. There are a lot of people who either unconsciously or willfully will like misinterpret that in terms of like, okay, you've got a very specific and prescriptive view on what a man or woman should be, whereas if you're in a circle or in a friendship group where you use that term and you've basically got like a generous interpretation of what the other person means, then it can be a useful term for describing these kind of dynamics and describing what you're after.
Yeah, I think if you're a group of people that assume positive intent, And I think it's a really useful term to say, this is what I'm looking for. And it just summarizes that so clearly. Or when you're describing yourself, you're saying, I want to become high value, that whatever things that I consider to be valuable, I want those. I think the issue is when people interpret it as, if you say X is high value, therefore A, B, C, D, all the way to Y is not high value.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a fair, I guess, logical leap to make. But I think it's just a very effective way to say, I want to become more, or I want to find someone that matches me. And that's all I think that's all it's saying. But that being said, I do like when I'm occasionally checked on my language, because we can use the example that we had in a WhatsApp group that I are in with another friend, where I said, I can't remember the exact quote, and I know you know it, where we say women break rules for alphas and make rules for betas. And I think I got corrected by our friend, or Fabio, where he said, actually, women may will do things they like for men they like, and for men they don't like, they might make them take longer to do stuff. And I think that was I actually found that really powerful. That was really transformative, that conversation, because then I started getting these really big pride issues where if I really liked a woman and she wasn't willing to like me back, or maybe it'd take a long time for her to be interested in me, it would really hurt my self-worth, because I think I'm a beta male. I don't even know what beta male means, but I'm saying this phrase, all it's going through my head nonstop. Whereas if I rephrase it as, if she likes you, she's going to invite you for dinner. She's going to take you out. She'll cook for you. And if she doesn't like you, you have to earn her affection. That's completely fair. Some people like you, some people don't like you. And I found it generally damaging to my mental health, having that alpha beta mentality. Was when I rephrased it, thanks to Fabio's rephrasing of just, either she's into you or not into you. It was just...
Yeah, for sure.
But I still think...
And there's also there's also an element of, there's so many different things going on at their moment in their life.
Exactly.
There are so many different phases of what they are into, or what they are looking for, whether that be, something super wholesome, or whether that be something, darker desires, etc. Let's go on another tangent. I forgot where I was going with that now.
But I want to raise on your previous point. I think it's
yeah.
tough when people assume negative intent, and I think that's really annoying. And I think you gave it good counter when someone does that. Like, what did you think I mean by that?
I say this all the time, and I think this particularly came from a position of I used to be much more argumentative and used to really enjoy the debate. I still enjoy debating a lot, but I definitely over time found there was much more value in like understanding where someone is coming from. One, because most topics that you can have a debate about, once you've had a number of debates on them, the variation in that conversation is not huge, and you definitely refine your argument, but it can lose its novelty and interest and lack of adrenaline rush as well. Maybe not adrenaline rush, but lack of rush that you get from that kind of debating gladiatorial language. Whereas if you come from an understanding point of view, I feel that you learn a lot more nuances about where someone is coming from. And then following on from that comes to what you said in terms of like when you're in the reverse position and someone suddenly, you can often see it in their body posture as well, suddenly like wants to either willfully misunderstand you, or is just triggered and is reacting in a habitual way, either habitual from their own personal circumstances or habitual from a kind of social media-esque perspective, is most of the time, if you ask them like, what do you think I meant by that? They will be able to very articulately and normally very accurately describe what they thought you meant by that phrase. And what they'll often say, doing this big ominous is they'll often say, yeah, but someone else could misinterpret you like that. And it's like, yeah, okay, but we're not in that scenario.
Exactly.
And you would assume some degree of social nuance in different situations. So I'm not necessarily against people, calling each other out. Actually, definitely not. And you gave me a great example of where Fabio did it. Pardon?
He did it in a very nice way. He didn't do it
exactly. He did it in an open, like generous interpretation. Just an open way. Yeah.
It wasn't that I think you're saying this stuff. He said, I just wanted to say, I want to question that phrasing, but I know what you mean. Whereas when I think the examples we're thinking of, it's, oh, you're saying this is this. Like, no, you could have just said from the start, oh, someone could interpret like that, but I know what you mean. Yeah. That would be a much nicer way to check someone.
100%.
On these things. But it's interesting that you linked self-development to these incel red pill communities. And I actually don't even know why they're so linked. My theory is that a lot of what is considered high value when describing a woman in these communities often conflicts with sexual empowerment for women, and I think that's where it's like, okay, you're misogynistic.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think when men go into self-development communities and when it often conflicts with women's sexual empowerment views.
Interesting.
And I think that's where the disconnect comes in. You listen to someone like Andrew Tate, for example, or Jordan Peterson, or I mean, they're very different people to each other.
Yeah.
But I'm just giving the wide spectrum.
So if someone listened to Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, sorry,
Yeah, it's going to be a big push to you be a man in a monogamous relationship. That's going to be maybe not Andrew Tate, but Jordan Peterson for sure. And I think that naturally that conflicts with everything about you as a woman should be sexually empowered and do. So I think that's where the feud comes in a bit, and I think this links to our previous topic of 80% of men not getting matches on apps. They're hearing, oh yeah, but you can just match with anyone. You have so many options, and I don't think people realize what it's like to be a man that doesn't get options. Especially when they're constantly reminded of it every single day by app culture. And they're seeing 20% of men getting with all the girls that they would love to get with. And I think it really stings their pride and they become incels, they become red pill.
Yep.
And then, but of course, with that becomes a desire to become more, which is the self-development. And then they want to justify the fact that women don't like them by saying that women are, degrading them. It's like, you don't want to sleep with me, but you're horrible because you shouldn't be sleeping around, And I think there's this
like the Madonna whore complex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it gets messy, and then I think it has a big. It also linked. I think all these different things. That's why I see it. There's a desire to be more, but a desire to justify the fact that people don't like you because they're just whores,
Yep.
Instead of you becoming more attractive, you just blame them for being not being disciplined.
100%. So then maybe in this realm. That was like a really, really interesting specific example of like a big mindset shift that you've had. Are there any other examples, either from ages ago or recently, that you were like, fuck, once I started thinking about it in that way, that was really useful?
And I think speaking to you helps with this is because I think I definitely suffer a bit from a Madonna whore complex for sure. As in, I definitely struggle with the Western sexualization of humanity, and when I'm in a romantic dating stage, I really struggle to engage with the fact when a woman has lots of history, and I struggle with that. And I think I need to not let that impact my self-worth. That, for example, just because she wanted those things with those people, that doesn't mean she can't have it. Like you said, sometimes you want darker desires, sometimes a woman wants a healthy, monogamous, supportive relationship. And I think just because I meet a woman who did want those other things, that doesn't mean that she doesn't want to be my wife now, So I think there's something that I'm still actively working on. I think hearing your thoughts and other friends' thoughts and not being so binary, it's just life is much more fluid than I think I've realized. And that's something that I actively want to work on now. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if it's some insecurity. And then on the flip side, maybe it's not insecure. Maybe it's wise to date someone who's been less promiscuous. I don't know. So even I'm confused.
Yeah. You can always
I don't want to go the whole. I want to be woke and say yes, I should date anyone. On the flip side, I don't want to judge everyone. And I'm personally struggling with this dichotomy.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think maybe my view on that is I wouldn't even put myself on the woke end of the spectrum. I just very approach these things with like I think anything's kind of possible point of view in terms of the variations in personality types means that there are lots of people who can be very promiscuous outside of relationship. Yes. When they are in a relationship, they're still loyal or monogamous or whatever aspects that they're looking for.
Yeah, assuming you wanted monogamy.
Yeah, assuming so million. Cool. So if you want, what are you looking for in a woman right now?
I mean, I'd say I'm definitely looking for monogamous relationship now. I think what I've realized, I've invested so much energy and time into dating girls, seduction, being able to speak to a girl in public and not be shy. But these aren't the same as relationship skills. This isn't the same as cooking her meals. This isn't the same as reading her body language and seeing she's in pain because of her period, so you buy her some flowers and treat her well. This isn't the same as doing the chores or just sitting at home when, maybe that honeymoon phase is over and or taking her for a surprise. All these different things I've not invested in these aspects. So I feel I'm almost quite behind in many ways in terms of being a valuable partner material to someone. So I like to invest in being more like this and getting away from that sort of dating culture. Also in the yogic system, to bring the yogic system back, it's actually very advised to be monogamous from the start and not to sleep around. They believe in something called Hunana Bandha Karma, which is that your body holds a memory of everything it touches, everything you've smelled, everything you've seen, everything your senses has engaged in. It's stored in your memory banks, even if you can't consciously recall it. So when you sleep around, it's a very intimate experience, and it impacts the body's memory, and it has an impact on they claim the yoga system on anxiety and depression and a confusion. Especially,
It's interesting that the conclusion in that case is like that, or it seems like the more memories there are a bad thing, whereas you would imagine that if you're collecting memories and you're collecting more good memories, that would be a positive thing.
So yeah, not mental memories, but the body's memory, and this is beyond my understanding. If you type in Runana Bandha Karma, you can see explanation, but that's a really good point. I don't have the answer to that. So because the yogic system, it's not about morals, like I was saying with food. It's about what is conducive for your system to be receptive to a deep state.
Interesting.
So it's not about it's immoral for you to have many partners.
Right.
This is not conducive for your body to be as receptive as possible to what we're offering. So that's why very much in the ancient Indian culture, you arrange marriage quite young. You might not physically be with your partner, but this is going to be your wife. They'll tell you when you're very young, and you're going to marry them at some point, or that's your husband. Then you're settled, or you became a monk and you transcended. You transcended it, or you settled it. You're sexually romantically settled this person. Now you can do something meaningful with your life. That was how it was approached.
So
rather than wasting how much energy can you spend on Hinge, texting 20 girls for one evening? I'm thinking, and it's insane. And then where's that? You're just settled. Okay, now you got to become a businessman. Now you become a warrior. Now you become whatever your caste was. Of course, they had a caste system back then. So on that aspect, that's one reason why I want to do it. And like I'm saying, it's not a moral thing. I think it's conducive for the lifestyle I want to live, where I can hard focus and do something of worth before I die. On the other hand, I've realized in small snippets of relationships how beautiful it is to have that companionship. And I wish I invested a bit more in that and not in the grass is greener, always chasing something new. So to answer your question, I wouldn't define traits, because I think life is beautiful and it happens beyond your own imagination. They say you imagine a house, then life gives you a mansion. That would be way cooler. So rather than me trying to define strictly what I want, one thing I have come, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, is the importance of matching in interests and hobbies versus just matching in values. I think this links to another question, which is how important it is to have friends. Because if you have many friends, let's say me and you, let's pretend we both love bouldering. I know you do. Yep. I'm not that into it, but we boulder together. That's one less hat that your future partner has to wear. You've got someone to share that with.
Oh yeah, I 100%.
And then you can focus just on values.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah.
And I definitely one thing that I'm thinking about is I'm actually very rarely thinking about common interests.
But I think a lot of people do think about common interests.
A lot of people do, and maybe not to say that long-term relationships in the past haven't had common interests, but they've not been what they've not been what I've sought out, and they've actually not been something that I've noticed until a little bit further down the line. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, as you said, I think a lot of people optimize towards common interests.
They'll date someone for long term just because they both play football or whatever.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
But on the flip side, having multiple friends where you can be... Actually, I had this conversation with someone around authenticity very recently, like a few days ago. Oh, and authenticity is a massive word and it means lots of different things to different people. But it was about the idea of like speaking about some things with some people and some things with other things. And like for me, authenticity does not mean wearing my entire personality on my sleeve at all moments. It doesn't mean I have to bring 100% of me to every moment, or 100% of my personality to every moment. It just means when I'm using this 10-20% of my personality with this person, that all the whole of that 10-20% is real, is true, and is honest. But there can still be another 60-80% that I either don't want to show at that moment, want to show later down the line, or actually just feel no desire to show it and would prefer to express it in a different space with other people. That's definitely a big thing which I consciously think about.
Yeah, and I think there's a study about one of the biggest key indicators of happiness. Once again, I hate quoting studies. I'm not prepared with a study,
classic.
but
But we'll link to them in the comments.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is the importance of friendship is one of the biggest things. Is friends actually,
Mm.
because it's actually really, and actually friends can also be really good for a healthy marriage, because like we're saying, you can express different sides of yourselves to them. And so I think, to answer your original question, what I'm looking for, it's in a roundabout way, the importance, I think, of monogamy, for what I want. Not saying morally, I'm not saying a judgment, but for the lifestyle I want, I think, like I said, it's the particular diet that's most conducive for the body I want. I'm not always eating like that, so it's not that that is better than another diet. But for what I envision as my ideal self, the high value thing for myself, it's not that. This doesn't mean that other styles are not valuable. One aspect would be monogamy, and two would be shared values. But otherwise, the list is open, because I have so many friends, so many people I can express things with. So as long as values are shared, that's really all I'm, what I'm looking for. I wouldn't go beyond that. And who you click with, of course, helps. Obviously, physically, physically attracted to them. But yeah,
Okay, final question. If you could give one message to your younger self, let's say late teens, what would it be and why?
it'll be discipline is freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the younger me, because it's the younger me, not to everyone, so he would hopefully understand what that means. That everything that he's working on, if he can just stick to it, there you might not see it now, but over time there'll be benefits. The principle of Kaizen, the principle of just keep at something, and life will blossom and flourish for you, rather than just seeking short, quick wins or satisfaction, or trying to settle your pride or ego. Just discipline is freedom. Hard is a quote, which is easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. And I really think if the younger version of me did more of the harder choices, the future me would enjoy the dividends of that investment.
Cool.
So,
I like that. And then what advice do you think yourself in 15 years' time will be giving you now?
don't hesitate and take risks to get out of a 9 to 5.
Nice.
Yeah,
I
go
like
for it. And you either make something happen or you learn.
Cool.
And don't go back to old patterns of behavior that are not serving you,
Makes
that are
sense.
coming out of insecurity.
Cool. I like that. Sick. All right, man.
Thanks, man.
That is now actually the end.
Yeah. That was cool, man.
Oh, man. Thanks.